Hello, great to see you. Today, we will begin by discussing Marcus Aurelius and his meditations. I know you've already had a good introduction with Professor Pedro Paiva, so I don't need to go into too much detail about this. You are already familiar with the greatness of Marcus Aurelius, an emperor of a doctrine that demanded humility and detachment from material things. The Roman emperor was simply able to adhere to these precepts. His steadfastness, in fact, we touched on this in the introduction about the fundamental principle of Stoicism, which is precisely steadfastness in the face of adversity. While simultaneously pursuing the relentless quest for goodness to inhabit the world as a human being. To leave the world a little better than he found it. We know that Marcus Aurelius was one of the so-called five great emperors. Of the good emperors, starting with Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and it ends with him. It was a brilliant era where it is said there was a lot of social peace in the sense of having good governance in Rome. It is even said that it was one of the best moments in the history of Rome. In fact, there's even a funny story that says when the barbarians heard that a philosopher would come to power, they said, "Great, now we're done for." Because a philosopher doesn't know how to wage war. And Marcus Aurelius was undefeated throughout his life. He never lost a war against the barbarians. And it wasn't just anyone he was fighting against. Basically, Marcus Aurelius spent his entire life fighting, on one hand, against the Germans, and on the other, against the Parthians. They were violent, aggressive enemies. He even ended up dying on one of these battlefronts. But he was undefeated in all those battles. In other words, to sum up the story so you can understand it well, if you go to Plato's Republic, there's a certain moment when Plato said that the distinguishing trait of a philosopher is to be spirited in the face of adversity and eager, and lively in the pursuit of knowledge. He explains this in detail. He says, look, it's no use being a spirited man for the battle of life and drowsy when it comes to knowledge. Nor the opposite, interested in knowledge but unable to muster the grit to put it into practice in life. It's necessary to reconcile both to be a good philosopher. I don't need to explain to you that, of course, Marcus Aurelius fits into this category like few others in history. He was a great emperor, so humble, so simple, that for a large part of his life, he refused to sleep in very comfortable beds. He slept on a mat on the floor. He ate in a very modest, fleeting manner. The gossip in Rome said that the servants, the attendants, the slaves dressed better than the emperor. He was very detached from recognition. He was always a very simple man, and he lived 19 years as an emperor during an extremely complicated time, constantly facing adversities. He endured plagues. He faced constant harassment from barbarians and betrayals very close to him, such as the case of his friend Avidius Cassius. Without letting it take him off his path, off his center, at any moment. And this is the idea he advocated: the ability that a person must acquire to have control over themselves in such a way that each of their actions demonstrates that a human being was there. If I notice something very curious, now that we're going to dive into the book, at least these first two chapters, we'll cover 2 chapters per week. In the end, he says where he was on the battlefield. This book is titled To Myself. It was a journal he wrote for his own conscience, an exhortation made to his own awareness. At most, to be read among family members. He didn't intend it for that. The publicity. These were exhortations he made to keep his conscience elevated, even in situations like these. So, the first chapter ends, and he mentions where he was camped. The second chapter ends, and he mentions where he was camped. And yet, he had the presence of mind to philosophize. This book, if you don't know, remained lost for a long time. It was discovered during the Renaissance. And then it was translated again, and it was shared, and it began to be disseminated, returning to the public as a work of moral support, for which he is still admired in our days. A great moral exhortation for a person to remain humane, regardless of what the world may become, regardless, even, of life or death. It prepares a person so that nothing can steal away their human condition. Look at this beautiful and interesting thing, folks. I brought you a book on the history of Rome by a citizen named Edward Gibbon, called The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Look at what he says. If a man were called upon to choose a period in the history of the world, during which the condition of the human race was happiest and most prosperous, he would, without hesitation, they would choose the period between the death of Domitian and the rise of Commodus. In other words, it is precisely from Nerva to Marcus Aurelius, the 5 good emperors. The vast expanse of the Roman Empire was governed by absolute power, guided by virtue and wisdom. In other words, we've already experienced this in history. The armies were held in check by the firm yet gentle hand of 4 successive emperors, whose personality and authority commanded with respect. The forms of civil administration were carefully preserved by Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, and the Antonines, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, who delighted in the image of freedom and liked to see themselves as ministers responsible for the laws. Such princes would have earned the honor of restoring the Republic, if the Romans of that time were capable of enjoying a rational freedom. In other words, that's a guess from Edward Gibbon. I, personally, have my doubts. Which button would I press inside a time machine? Where would I go? But for sure, I would take that suggestion into consideration. There are some other interesting ones too, but this really is a very inviting moment. You can imagine the greatest empire in the world being led by a philosopher, with a profound sense of ethics and respect for the human condition. That was Marcus Aurelius. Well, let's dive into chapters 1 and 2 today. You'll notice an interesting fact that chapter 1 is entirely dedicated to introductions, let's say, to the apologies of men who taught him something. In this sense, I won't be reading. First of all, it's important to let you know, I won't be reading the entire book. I've selected some passages, but from this first book, you'll see that he praises his mother, his father, whom he regards as his father, Antoninus Pius, who adopted him, all his teachers, all the difficult and easy men he lived with, and he highlights what these men taught him. It's interesting. Even those he tolerated with greater resistance, like, for example, Rusticus. He praises Rusticus for his qualities, highlighting what he had best. He says very interesting things. I won't read all these acknowledgments, but I've made a selection for you that I found interesting. All the virtues he praises in all these people in this first chapter. In other words, a manual of instructions for the formation, for the construction of an extraordinary man. He simply spends the entire chapter talking about the virtues of men. And I collected all of them. So, if you have any doubts about a good, humane sense of life, here is a good instruction manual. Let's see what Marcus Aurelius praises in men and gives thanks for, and then what he praises the gods for and gives thanks. To men, moderate habits, gentleness in dealings, piety. Absence of malicious ideas, simplicity, resilience, initiative, discretion, disdain for trivialities and superstitions, frankness, love for philosophy, good character, capacity for forgiveness and reconciliation, freedom of spirit, steadfastness, good cheer, patience, benevolence, solicitude, humility, mastery over anger and passions, culture without pedantry, discernment, attention to friends and love for teachers, love for truth and justice, generosity. Cordiality, love for work, gentleness, modesty, frugality in spending, a dislike for flattery, nor seeking recognition, sobriety, energy, and reflection. In other words, he simply analyzes all the positive aspects he found in human beings from the people he encountered throughout his life. Imagine what that is like. Every time someone passed by him, he would look for another virtue to add to his list. And he ended with a generous list like this: of all the greatness that can be found in a human being. If you analyze his life, you will see that he strived to practice all of this. You might say, well, but a warrior who spent his entire life fighting against barbarians, are you going to tell me that he had compassion? Yes, in war, he fulfilled his duty. For his camp, he harbored not a drop of hatred. In fact, I remember the first time I read Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, an old edition, which I no longer remember which publisher it was from. At the beginning, it published Marcus Aurelius' speech to the Senate asking for forgiveness for Avidius Cassius and his family. Because for Rome, for the Roman Senate, it was a terrible sin to conspire against the emperor. Avidius Cassius tries to seize power from him while he is at war and ends up being killed in battle. But he asks for compassion because, according to the Senate's law, his entire family would be banished. Also, he delivers this speech to the Senate asking for compassion for the one who had betrayed him, a friend who had betrayed him. In other words, he was a living demonstration of everything he sought. It seems that when he saw it, he sought to instill it within himself. Because when you read the biography of Marcus Aurelius, it's more or less a collection of moments where he seeks to practice these things. It wasn't just a list. It was a set of observations that he sought to implement in his life. Typical philosopher stuff. Don't learn to memorize, learn to live. And, finally, he thanks the gods for having had a good family, good friends and mentors who taught him what was necessary in life. Lessons passed down through life, the ability to help those in need, protection against sophists in youth. Look at how curious that is. It's interesting when we look throughout history. Often, humans approach what they consider divine more as beggars than with attitudes of gratitude. Marcus Aurelius only addresses the gods in this book with attitudes of gratitude. And look, what kind of thing? He gives thanks. Good family. Well, he faced difficulties in his life. His son was Commodus, who was a tyrant. Complex, he lost many of his children. 6 of his 13 children died in childhood. He lived through many adversities. Even so, he gives thanks. He didn't have a perfect family. There are many people throughout history who speak very poorly of his wife, Faustina the Younger, but even so, he gives thanks. Good friends, some betrayed him, tried to kill him, but even so, he gives thanks. Teachers who taught him what was necessary in life. These teachers weren't always virtuous people. Sometimes they were people who challenged him, people against whom he fought, but still learned from them. Lessons passed down through life. These lessons are passed down through the lives of all of us. But he received these lessons. He was attentive. He was reading life with the disposition, with the spirit of a learner, which is what is expected of a philosopher. The ability to help those in need. I find it very beautiful when he says, "Fortunately, when someone needed help, I was never without the means to assist." He considered this a good financial condition. When someone needs your help, you always have the means to assist. It was the only thing he sought to be prepared for. With material things, to meet the needs of those who turn to him in difficult moments. What else? Protection against the sophists in his youth. And then he mentions a series of people who tried to influence him with futile, vain words, and how he was able to see through the words and develop, through them, a profound discernment, which transformed him not into an enlightened man, but into a good man. Notice how interesting and profound this is. And this is his gratitude, the first chapter of his work. Gratitude to men and to the gods. And then we move on to chapter 2, where I have indeed selected some passages for you. As I mentioned, we can't talk about all the passages. I have selected a few paragraphs, but I hope you can do your reading and go through all the paragraphs. He then begins in the first paragraph by saying the following: "You should tell yourself at dawn, I know I will encounter an indiscreet person, an ungrateful one, a rude one, a rogue, an envious one, an ignorant one. I do not fear that they will cause me any harm." You realize that what he sets for himself, the world is dual. I know that when I go out on the street, it might be sunny or it might rain. If I go out on the street unprepared for rain and the rain soaks me, don't blame the rain. Blame yourself for not being prepared to face the duality of the world. So, even before leaving home, you already know that outside there may be good people, there may be rogues, there may be deceivers, there may be rain, there may be sunshine. Duality is part of the fundamental conditions of life that a person must understand. And if you're unprepared for this, don't blame duality. Don't blame the circumstances. Blame yourself for going out unprotected and unprepared for them. You allowed yourself to be affected. I remember an Eastern martial arts tradition that said the warrior can be wounded, but never offended. I find this passage very interesting. Imagine, others may even hurt you, but if you're prepared for it, offend you. They won't. They are not capable of penetrating more than your skin. In your deepest discernment, they are not capable of stealing who you are. And that is very much Stoicism. This is very much Marcus Aurelius. Second, do not let your soul curse fate in the present, nor fear it in the future. Something that deeply permeates Stoicism. You will see this a lot in Epictetus, who is also a great master of the third phase of Stoicism. Epictetus constantly spoke of this trust in life. And here, Marcus Aurelius, you will see him reiterate this same idea. Nothing happens to a person that is not inherent to being human. The confidence that what happens to us is what is necessary to awaken us and make us a better human being. On the other side of difficulties, you will find a greater, better, more genuinely human being. If you knew how to cross them with dignity, if you knew how to extract from them what they had to teach you, because they were drawn into your life by your need for experience, by your need to grow. So, do not curse life, neither in the present, nor in the past, nor in the future. Try to understand the laws that govern life. And then you will see one of the philosophical concepts that I find most beautiful, which comes from the Stoic school. And much later, it is reinforced by Nietzsche. The idea of amor fati. Do you know what amor fati is? It's not just about accepting the circumstances of life. I accept it. It had to be this way. I needed this. All right, that has a certain value. But amor fati is more than that. It's about loving the fact that things happen this way and not another. If it obeys a universal law, if it was drawn in, for me, the need to grow, all of this is beautiful, all of this is imbued with meaning. You reclaim all the strangeness, you reclaim the entire process of rejection. You learn to love the course of events in your life, just the way it happened. Why do you consider this the best path? Once life is not random, life is governed by laws, life is intelligent, and this permeates all Stoic thought. Trust, because we do not live in the midst of chaos, but in the cosmos. Third paragraph. Accidental things are not outside of nature. That is, from the chain and succession governed by providence, since everything flows from it. That, remember, is obvious. We can't help but associate it with the Indian law of karma. In other words, cause and effect. There is no eventuality. That is outside this law. Or, at this moment, you are reaping the effects of something that was planted at a certain time. And, in doing so, you can learn a lot about the foundations of that action. What needs to be perpetuated, what can be corrected, or at this moment, You plant the seed of something you will harvest in the future. And by linking causes and effects, a person learns from life's experiences. Make your own life a laboratory, and you can start correcting these elements, those seeds that produced a fruit you did not desire. In other words, this coherent concatenation, which has everything to do with the idea of an intelligent universe. What preserves the world are the transformations, both of the elements and the compounds they form. Look how interesting. The idea that the universe changes and that's why it endures. Because if it always remained the same in the material world, its life would be short. In other words, why doesn't human life cease? Because it transforms from one body to another and another and another. If it were up to me alone, in some time, human life would have ended. If it depended on just one episode, it wouldn't have much longevity. We wouldn't get very far. Life perpetuates because it renews itself. It's interesting. We observe, then, that the assurance we are moving in favor of time is transformation. Not everything, but the conservation of what is essential, what we have already realized, what we have already harvested, but the planting of something more positive for the future. This process of building oneself, which is almost a continuation of that maxim from Delphi. Man, know yourself. Man, master yourself. Man, transform yourself. This is the assurance that you are becoming a better human being than you were. Yesterday, last week, last year, the past, when it arrived here. This ensures that you are maintaining continuity. The one who remains stuck in time reaches a point where time no longer holds meaning for them. If you observe an image that is very common when we study Egypt, you will see Nut and Geb, the sky and the earth, separated and supporting the overcoming in the middle, with hands holding up the sky. You will have Shu. And Shu represented was a god that symbolized exactly time. Time creates a space between spirit and matter, between heaven and earth, for the drama of the development of our consciousness to unfold. So, real time only exists for the human being when their consciousness advances. As Parmenides would say, in other words, time is nothing more than the advance of light against the shadows. If this is not happening, there has been no time. Only clock time. Real time is the time of expansion, of consciousness, meaning changes, transformations, facing them as positives, knowing how to direct them so that you change in a direction that is humanly valid. So that there is a human ideal that walks and develops in this direction. 4. A limited period of time has been granted to you. And if you don't use it to calm yourself, time will seize it, you will disappear. Nothing will happen. Once again, the idea of time. If you don't use it to calm yourself, what does it mean? As Plato once said, there is a struggle within us between the human and the animal. If this human cannot subdue the animal, which is the great human task, to not be just a being with a human appearance, but with a human essence, do not kill the animal that lives within us, because it serves us for survival, but do not let it dominate our lives. If you don't humanize yourself, your time is illusory, it didn't exist. It's as if you saw a human being today and painted a picture of their virtues and flaws. And in 20 years, you saw them and they had exactly the same virtues and exactly the same flaws. You could say there was no time. And real time is measured by advances towards the human ideal. So, if we don't master this animal self, if we don't keep sculpting the human being within us, there was no time. We waste this moment when Shu opened the stage for the drama of our consciousness to unfold. Development, desarrollo, in Spanish, comes from something similar to unraveling. It was like opening the scrolls to see what was written inside. It's as if within us we were a scroll that we unravel with great care so as not to destroy it, without impulse, without passions, but with feelings and reason. We come to see the sacred word inscribed there, which we are meant to communicate to the world, which is our own identity. Continuing. This chapter 5, I insist on reading it in full to you because I find it very interesting. Imagine that here we are talking about Rome, we are talking about humanity as one. Just look, as a Roman and as a man, take care to fulfill your obligations of each hour. With strict and simple gravity, with courage, freedom, justice, banishing any other thought from yourself. You will only achieve this if you perform each act as if it were the last of your life, avoiding every thoughtless action, every passionate transgression of the laws of reason, every deceit, every vanity, every rebellion against destiny. There are not many principles whose possession provides a peaceful and godly life, as we see. From those who observe them, the gods demand nothing more. Interesting, isn't it? There is nothing more to ask of a man than that he strives daily, through all his potential, to become more and more human. Neither the heavens nor the earth have anything to ask of him. It reminds me a lot of a much later thinker, who was Immanuel Kant, when he says that the only virtue that is good in itself is goodwill. All the others can be used for both evil and good. And what is goodwill? To put it simply, goodwill is the desire to achieve good. Because even when you make a mistake, you correct yourself based on that error and continue striving for good. Don't give up on your own ideal of your goal. Therefore, even in mistakes, is always improving. So, it's interesting because this is a man whom no pressure of destiny needs to push. He walks alone. Continuing, in 7, he will say that external accidents toss you from side to side. Ensure a bit of leisure to meditate on some good truth and escape the hustle and bustle. From another turmoil, you must protect yourself, that of the foolish, who throughout their lives exhaust themselves in fruitless movements, unable to direct their inclinations and thoughts. In other words, those who spend all their energy, life walking in circles. They lack a goal, so they don't bring their tools to the surface. The latent powers of man only emerge. For those who have a goal, have a mission. And that's why tools become necessary. Because he wants to build something. So he talks, for example, about the issue of ensure a bit of leisure to meditate on some good truth. See how interesting this is? The concept of leisure, according to Marcus Aurelius, what is leisure? It's about raising awareness a bit, is to free her from this burden she sometimes has to drag of living in such a troubled world, seek to develop in her an affinity with the good, the beautiful, the just. Talk about ideas. Having someone with whom to share noble ideas, being able to converse, even with oneself. A bit of what Plato called divine bones. A meeting with one's own soul. For him, that is leisure. It's what renews us the most. He's probably right. Nothing renews a person as much as the human condition itself. It's like a fountain. Where will he draw fuel to continue his journey? No one is unhappy for not having probed what goes on in another soul. However, those who do not watch over the movements of their own soul are inevitably unhappy. If we observe, I draw your attention in various ways. In various lectures about this, the essence of the greatest. Part of our personal conversations, of our news in the collective, is always to observe and highlight a fact that occurred, an event. Sometimes it's an event of nature. But it always has to come with someone's blame attached. What someone did wrong, someone's flaws. How rare it is to hear someone say how so-and-so is good, observing what they have that is most positive. We expend a lot of energy talking about others, and very little energy trying to get to know the person that is you, the human being that is you. Only when you find your identity can you illuminate the world around you and see it clearly. Because when you look inside yourself, you only see shadows. What you project onto others is also just shadows. We have this morbid focus, which is almost pathological in our historical moment. Always hunting for culprits, always in this syndrome of oppressors and victims, always believing that all human relationships are about power and exploitation. Always poisoning the entire human condition by not recognizing what we have that is best. Because they do not recognize it within themselves. It's like a lighthouse in the middle of the ocean. It's kind of a cliche, but it's something like this. It has light, therefore it illuminates the ships around it. If it doesn't have light to see the things around it, it has to wait for a ship to pass by and cast a bit of light. This ship that passes and casts light is sometimes the opinion of the collective, which it absorbs passively because it cannot see for itself. Observe, reflect a little on this. 12. Here is another one I'd like to read to you in full because it's really worth it. Paragraph 12 of chapter 2. As everything passes swiftly, the beings in the world, their memory in time. The tangible objects that entice us with promises of pleasure, that terrify us with the prospect of suffering, or whose brilliance dazzles us. We must not forget how vile they are, despicable, abject, putrid, and dead. Who are those whose opinions and words bestow glory? What is death? If we consider it on its own, if by a mental abstraction we separate it from the phantoms we associate with it, we will see that it is nothing more than an operation of nature. It is childish to fear an operation of nature. And it's not just a mundane operation of nature, but rather also a useful operation for nature. How men relate to God, and in what part of our being, and in what condition of that part. This reminded me of a very interesting passage from Hindu tradition. India has a triad of gods, the Trimurti, which consists of Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer, the renewer. And it was said that once humanity did not understand Shiva's role, and they began to think he was negative, that he was evil because he destroyed. And he, very offended, with that, he withdrew all his forces from the world and left. And then what happened? The plants and seeds fell dead to the ground and were unable to decompose to nourish the earth. The bodies of animals and humans fell dead to the ground. And, at times, victims of diseases, and they continued to spread their diseases because they did not decompose. And more, the earth became putrid, infected with dead bodies, and increasingly barren. And this made life unviable. Hunger came, disease came, and the people understood Shiva's role, and they went to call him back. He comes with his entourage, and once again, with his dance, Shiva Natraja renews all the forms of the world without, however, touching their essence. So you see, Marcus Aurelius here is saying, death is not just a fact of nature. Just like spring, summer, autumn, winter, it is also necessary for nature. If everything we observe, which is part of nature's cycles, is necessary for it, we accept as good, it's a bit contradictory that we don't try to understand death in the same way. It's not an easy experience, it certainly isn't. But look, imagine this, nature needs rain. If I hated the rain to the point of being permanently upset when it rains, it would be absurd. Wouldn't it be nonsensical? We must understand that the world is not limited to my likes. Appreciations, rejections, the world has needs, nature has needs. And understand that nature is harmonious and works for nothing other than the good. It works for nothing other than unity. Is also characteristic of a philosopher. And notice that he will also talk about this world of favorable opinions, which we make a point of collecting about ourselves. How they are fleeting. There's a certain passage in the book, further ahead, where you'll see he starts mentioning a bunch of names of men who were famous, a generation before his. And at that moment, they no longer meant anything. It's curious that he says this, all the names will disappear. Although his own, 2,000 years later, almost 2,000 years later, has not disappeared, perhaps because he focused on what endures. The human soul is diminished and it rebels against the events of nature. When you harbor aversion towards someone and are inflamed with malicious desires, when one is overcome by pleasure or pain, when one disguises, acts, or speaks without honesty against the truth, when you don't direct your activity and tendencies towards a specific goal, doing whatever comes by chance, even the smallest actions should be organized according to their purpose. I always give this example in various lectures. Those who follow me must have already heard. I am walking in a certain direction. I ask you, is the direction right? Right or wrong? You will immediately ask me, where do you want to go? Of course, then I tell you, I want to reach that wall. If I'm going that way, now it's right. If I'm going this way, now it's wrong. Do you realize that right, wrong, true, false, good, evil must be in relation to the sense of life you have? That the true, the false, the right, the wrong, the good, and the human evil must be in relation to the human objective, which is to reach values, virtues, and wisdom to build oneself as a human being. The human ideal is that which measures all things in the human world. And if this ideal doesn't exist, how can it be measured? What is right and what is wrong? What does everyone think? What's in fashion? What is correct and what is incorrect? What everyone thinks, or at least what one side of society thinks. Because it always becomes polarized. Among those who are passionate about one thing and those who are passionate about another, realize that there is no possibility of individuality and evolution. If a person doesn't have a sense of human life and doesn't compare all their actions with this sense of life, like an architect you hired to build your house, draws up a blueprint of the finished house, and every day the foreman arrives there to know what to do today. He will look at the finished house, and so he has a direction on where to work, where to build, what he should do today. He has a sense of life, he has a final objective. So, from the moment we have this objective, it will say, let's have an aversion to certain human attributes, to hatred, to weakness, to violent passions. Why? Because they don't take us there. This gives a very clear discernment of what is humanistic and what is not, of what makes us grow, of what propels us to a state of being crude. We gain the ability to choose, we gain the ability to discern. That's so human, and we fulfill ourselves with that. Because each being fulfills itself by being what it is. Obviously, for a human being, a human attribute is a delight. The other day, I saw one of those doctors who gives a lot of testimonials around, saying that he has never seen a remedy as effective for his patients as recommending acts of kindness. He notices a process of solid self-esteem being built, a process of gratification, and a solid sense of life being constructed. I believe this doesn't happen only on the physical plane. On all levels, nothing is as beneficial for a person as behaving like a human being, as what nature expects from him. Philosophy consists in making the inner genius of each person invulnerable to outrages. Philosophy consists of, let's go back. Philosophy consists in making the inner genius of each person invulnerable to outrages. Unmoved, superior to common pleasures and pains. That it does not move by chance, by falsehood or malice, that it does not concern itself with what others do or fail to do, that accepts the vicissitudes and destiny as coming from the same source. In other words, nature. Weave for your growth. And both the challenges and the things that seem positive to us are tools to push us in the same direction. Above all, to await death with serenity. In it, seeing nothing more than the dissolution of the constituent elements of all beings. Everything that is composed will return to its original components. This is quite philosophical. In other words, it's natural for these compounds that make up my body to return to their nature. But there is something in me that is not part of these body compounds, which must also return to its nature. It would be illogical to imagine that the body returns to its nature, and the soul, its essence, no matter what you prefer to call it. So, can it be capable? Look at what philosophy proposed. Be capable of being invulnerable to adversities, do not move by chance for inhumane or trivial reasons, and be able to face death with serenity. This was the expected outcome of philosophy, which Marcus Aurelius advocated. Interesting, isn't it? How much we need this. It's hard to say in which historical moment we need it the most, but this is certainly a strong candidate to be one of the times we need it the most. We go around in circles a lot. We don't really know what we're doing here. Anyway, we'll stop here for today. As I mentioned, I've selected some thoughts. I hope they become subjects of good reflection on your part. That you can talk about this, that you can mature. Developing bonds of friendship around ideas like these is a delight, folks. It's one of the most beautiful things. It's one of the highest forms of friendship. One day we will talk about Cicero, about friendship. You'll see that this is how he conceptualizes misery. That come together to be a positive force in each other's lives. So, I hope you can have a good period of growth. And soon we'll continue with our chapters 3 and 4. Thank you very much. See you then.